Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're ready to begin. First off, I want to welcome you all to our Design Conversations lecture. And this is actually the next to last lecture of the series. We'll be finishing up with in 1 month with our final lecture of the year. But tonight is a very special night. I feel like I'm humbled to be in the presence of two graphic design pioneers. And because they're two figures that are very important in the history of graphic design. As we look at the history of graphic design, 1966 was a very important year. That was when our speakers arrived in the United States from Switzerland and brought the formal visual aesthetics of Swiss modernism to America for the first time. And we need to understand that, we need to look at it, and we need to celebrate it. Our first speaker, Inge Druckrey, was born in Berlin, but educated in Basel, Switzerland. She is taught at Yale University and Rhode School of Design, University of Hartford, Philadelphia College of Art, all over the place. She is working on a wonderful book on typography, which we can't wait to learn more about. And we're very, very happy to welcome Inge Druckrey.
My title is Studying, Practicing, Teaching, and Writing about Graphic Design. Some brief biographical information first. I was born in 1940 in Berlin, Germany, at the beginning of World War II. In 1949, my family united in Freiburg, Germany, not far from the Swiss border. After my high school diploma in 1959, my father allowed me to do whatever I wanted for half a year. Since I loved art, I chose to work with a local painter who was willing to give me some art training. I had received a good liberal arts education, but only a limited visual art education. Through him, I learned that there was such a field as graphic design, and that I should go to the source of it all, the graphic design program at the Kunstgewerbeschule in Basel, Switzerland. In the fall of 1959, I entered the foundation program with barely an idea what graphic design was. This was not unusual, since the field was only named around 1914, 45 years before I started my education. Basel, 1959 to 1965. It began with the foundation year. I recall, among other courses, many drawing courses focusing on writing with pencil and broad nib pen, letterform design, some color courses, and many others. After 3 semesters, I passed the entrance exam into the graphic design program. Courses in graphic design I remember well were those in typography, by Robert Büchler and Emil Rhode, and those of Armin Hofmann. The design department had a very well-equipped type shop. All typography courses were taught here. The first semester included all the intricacies of typesetting and letterpress printing. A later course with Emil Rhode added design problems, such as using typographic means to visually strengthen the meaning of a word. I'm sorry, the first one, since it's in German, is hang. Second one is impact. Third is flood. And this is flame. A course taught by Armin Hofmann included writing with a broad-nib pen. This course was usually, This course was usually taught during the last hour of Armin's design class. During this time, he demanded total concentration and absolute silence. A course called Light and Shadow taught me to see in terms of different gray values. The assignment was to draw a still life of objects under a focused light source and to match the values of the still life in our drawing. Off and on, the teacher would suddenly call individual students to the still life, asking in his bellowing, somewhat accusing voice, "Where is it darker, here or here?" A bit worried, we stared at the still life and then changed our drawing accordingly. This class was an important learning experience for me, especially for studio photography. This was followed by texture drawing, reproducing the textural quality of different surfaces, from smooth glass to the bristles of a brush or a furry surface. So this is all pencil drawing. An early design course by Armin Hofmann clarified one of his teaching techniques for me, an exercise of rhythmically arranging circles of different hue, intensity, and value in a given format so that the path of the eye encompassed the entire format. That is a good composition, by the way. This was followed by a poster assignment for toy store Franz Karl Weber. The not too successful little poster exemplifies how a clear form language underlies a design solution. The form language in this sketch of a poster for the Swiss Railroad uses horizontal lines in such a way that they create a subtle connotation of speeding trains or tracks of gravel seen from a speeding train. Poster competition for the Museum of Classical Sculpture, done in Armin Hofmann's class. This linoleum cut of a flute player is based on a famous Greek relief. I remember putting this sketch for the poster up against the wall of my one-room apartment at night, so I could see it the moment I woke up in the morning. I learned to let my eyes wander over a composition, to stare at it and to see if it all held together. What did I learn in all of this? I learned to see, to understand issues of composition. I understood the importance of abstraction for refined hand skills, and I developed a deep respect for the clarity and coherence of the underlying form language in any design. Though I was not sure about it during my education in Basel, I was definitely prepared when I started to work as a professional designer. When I arrived at the Studio Hartford in Zürich, Hans was already there, the first of many encounters throughout our career. Projects I was given here ranged from the daily fashion ad in the local newspaper to an entire corporate identity for a soft drink company. The next step in my career was to teach in the US. How did I get there? Hans had told me that Armin Hofmann was looking for someone to teach in the United States. When I called Armin asking him if it was okay to accept a teaching position without any previous experience, he simply said, "Just go," with total conviction that it would be fine. Later, I realized that he was 26 when he started to teach in Basel. Hans had told me I must have sent slides of work and a letter to Rob Roy Kelly immediately, and I remember cautiously warning him that I was a woman, and if that was okay. In 1966, there were very few women on design faculties or in the profession. Even in 1973, when I started to teach at Yale, I was only the second woman faculty member in the entire School of Art. What an unnecessary concern. Little did I know that Rob was a fierce defender of any minority, be it African American, American Indian, or women. The woman at 26. When I joined the faculty, the teaching approach at the department consisted of giving an assignment and a critique the following class meeting. I don't remember if I or Hans changed the structure to a more process-oriented teaching. The sophomore program then included no teaching of design fundamentals, so I suggested a course in basic design. I was given complete freedom to develop such a course. Loosely based on these sketches done during a trip at the Tuscany region in Italy with Hans and Chris the summer before I left for Kansas City, I gave my first assignment to find different ways to place two squares into a given format in such a way that they supported each other as well as the surrounding negative area. After the first year, Rob decided to bring another of Armin's students to teach. I suggested Hans, and Chris followed him a little later. After the second year in Kansas City, my teaching visa was up, and after a wonderful trip through Mexico with Hans and Chris, I returned to Germany. Based on my experience in Kansas City, I had realized that I enjoyed teaching and decided to find a teaching position in Germany. I ended up in Krefeld. My time in Germany coincided with student revolts against the political system and also with an emphasis on theory in the teaching. The response to an exhibit of Alber's interaction of color I had arranged was received quite critically, with the argument that Alber's work lacked a scientific base. On top of that, students decided that they didn't need any teachers, and the school closed for one semester. I used the time for freelance work. This was done with Max Mattis, a wonderful photographer. A wrapping paper for an interior design firm. And the next stop in my wandering was Philadelphia. I only include 2 student projects from this time, possibly influenced by Richard Saul Wurman's idea to make the city observable, a theme he had presented at the Aspen Design Conference. Ken suggested that the faculty develop a student project around one intersection in Philadelphia. I decided to document the range of signage found at the intersection. Students were to choose one sign and to photographically document other signs of the same fabrication technique, such as metal signs, plastic signs, neon signs. The next step was to arrange an interview with sign makers and to design a visual verbal documentation of each fabrication process. The research resulted in a great amount of valuable information, and I was able to convince Mickey Friedman at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis to give us an entire issue of her magazine, Design Quarterly, one of the first design magazines in this country. So that is the issue on signs. Plastic signs, metal signs. Oops, not yet. Another project I did in Philadelphia is this cover for the Union of Independent Colleges of Art. This design is especially interesting to me since it evolved out of a small, fast pencil sketch of straight and curved parallel lines. A sketch is the first attempt to secure the essential elements of a mental image on paper. This sketch describes the entire visual idea for the cover for me. I only had to choose the right object as well as carefully control the lighting in the photographs to achieve a similar effect as my sketch. Two years after arriving in Philadelphia, Alvin Eisenman asked me to teach at Yale. Due to the enforcement of Title IX, Yale was under pressure to hire women. My teaching at Yale continued to focus on design fundamentals. In the following exercises, I gave students the assignment to create a composition loosely based on a 9-square grid, using a form language of lines. The next assignment was to find a similar form language in various objects or architecture in their environment. My aim was to introduce students to the idea not to see the world around them as names, strainer, cover of a tin can, Lucan staircase, but rather in terms of form. Another project was to combine a letter with an object or sign. This exercise combines the first letter of a word with other signs or representations of object that clarified and enriched the meaning of the letter. Both together had to form a compact, coherent visual unit. My poster for the Yale Women's Forum uses a similar idea. A series of my own posters, which I still enjoy and consider successful, were all done at different times and places. For the Yale commencement, for the Fürstenberg porcelain manufactory, for a Beethoven concert at Yale, and a poster for a lecture by Rosemary Tissey in Philadelphia. And another concert poster. I taught part-time also at the Rhode Island School of Design. My part-time teaching there focused primarily on letterform design. I asked students to base their design of letters on earlier gestural writing exercises with a brush or with a carpenter's pencil. This resulted in letter forms that were surprising, beautiful, and alive. I documented my course, Learning from Historical Sources, in a publication of the Graphic Design Department at RISD under the title Spirals 91, if you want to find it. After taking over Chris Zielinski's drawing class for one semester while she was on sabbatical, Chris Myers offered me a full-time position at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia. Both Chris's, especially Chris Zielinski, supported my request for a full professorship. This was changed to a 5-year renewable contract, which was fine with me. I enjoyed the commitment to one institution, better pay, and the fellowship of my colleagues. It was here that Hans and I began working together again. Ken Hebert had retired, and Hans and I were asked to take over the senior project. I gratefully remember Susan Viggers' help as editor for the students' writing. The teaching in Philadelphia proved to be very productive. My work as a senior project advisor produced some beautiful results. This was work done by a student who insisted that he couldn't draw, he couldn't illustrate a text, so I told him not to worry, use black paper and scissors and do the story with cut paper. And it was wonderful. I mean, this image of the scared little pig and the dangerous wolf is just wonderful. Another course I taught in Philadelphia was Font Design Lab. This course introduced students to type design software. I hired 2 type designers, one a former student of mine, to teach us Type Tool. And after about 2 weeks, we were off and running. The results were impressive, and the process of creating proper spacing and kerning tables, great training for the students. A Russian student, someone who was very interested to do black letter, and I told him, I can't do black letter, so we have to work together and find good examples. That's after spacing and kerning tables, the text. A very inventive typeface. Another typeface with many ligatures, which are actually quite interesting in the text. This typeface is done by an Indian student. And she changed the angle of the pen. In Roman writing, the angle is from bottom left to top right. In the Indian broad nib pen or brush writing, it's an opposite angle. And it's actually quite wonderful what comes out. Condensed typeface. A sketch for a linked typeface, and the final result. Another condensed face. And this was very beautiful typeface with very interesting ligatures. And the test is this text. Can you read it up on screen? Which is really very, very beautiful. And here I would like to give special thanks to Hans, who made my weekly commuting from Cheshire to Philadelphia possible. He offered me to stay at his house during the days of my teaching. Hans is a wonderful host, as Roger knows, and his cooking and the grappa after dinner were very much appreciated. Thank you, Hans. This phase of my life focuses on a book I thought about since my time at Yale. Initially, it was to be a book about Anna Simmons, whose name I had encountered while preparing my seminar on book and type design at the Beinecke Library at Yale. Since there are very few women in the fields of lettering, book design, and printing, her name caught my eye. Through the research on Anna Simmons, I learned more about Edward Johnston, William Morris, Cobden Sanderson, and William Letherby. I discovered Rudolf von Larisch and F.H. Emke, and slowly developed a better picture about the times in which they lived, and what drew them to the decision to dedicate their life's work to the improvement of writing and lettering, of book design, printing, signage, personal handwriting, and to bring back a renewed appreciation for the beauty of letters. Whereas Johnston and Simmons, Johnston's student, laid the groundwork for modern type design, Larisch drew attention to proper letter spacing and the resulting beauty of a field of text. He also brought back playfulness in the use of letters and questioned the sole demand for legibility. Thus, I called my book In Honor of Letters. A little sneak preview of some of many very beautiful images from the book. And this, you should really appreciate it. This is the actual blackboard writing of Edward Johnston. Edward Johnston brought back the tools which were used in early manuscript hands, which is the reed pen with a wide nib, or actually a turkey feather. And so he used the broad-nibbed reed pen to do his studies about various manuscript hands, and then chose the Carolingian hand, which is the top line, which is readable and close to modern typefaces, as his foundation hand. This is a sheet of the portfolio of Anna Simmons' title and initials for the Bremer Press. The letters, the initials, were written with a broad-nib pen and then engraved in wood to be used in the printing of the Bremer Press books. So this is spectacularly beautiful. This is a sample of Fritz Helmut Emke, another person in my book. That's his design of the Emke Fraktur. And this is introducing Rudolf von Larisch. He brought back proper letter spacing in text, and he used the pieces of the library of the Golden Fleece in Vienna, which was a library which collected correspondence between reigning monarchs, which are all members of the Golden Fleece order. And if you look at the letter spacing in comparison to the inside space within letters, you see how that holds the entire field of text together. Frutiger, by the way, based his type design on this principle. And here are some playful examples from Rudolf von Larisch. It's a little book by one of his students. It's a linoleum cut, and he used a poem which frequently uses the letter O. So normally in a condensed typeface, the O would also be condensed. But here he purposely used the round O, and it makes a wonderful, interesting field of text and really plays on the frequent refrain, O. So it's a beautiful little booklet. This is by Rudolf von Larisch himself. He wrote a poem about a tree, and that is like a concrete poetry. It has the feel of a tree, and also you can read the poem. This is a woodcut by Walter Kech, who was the teacher of Frutiger and Hans Eduard Meyer, the important letterform designer in Zürich. And he was influenced by Rudolf von Larisch to play with the wonderful texture by cutting out the line spacing. It's also a woodcut. And that's the end. So let's see where you are. Well, it says is saving the auto recovery.
Don't click power forward because that's what I need.
Oh, that's right. Cancel. So where's yours?
Click the image. You just need to click the red button.
Right.
While Inge's closing out here, I'll just mention that after Hans's presentation, the three of us will sit down there and entertain questions from you guys. So please bear with us.
Okay.
Okay? Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Was okay?
Wonderful.
Thank
Wonderful. Okay. Let's see. Are you happy, Hans? Okay, part two. Hans Ulrich Allemann, born in Switzerland, studied at Basel also with Armin Hofmann and Emerita. Began his professional career in Zürich. 1967, he joined the Kansas City Art Institute and was part of the Rob Roy Kelly team. The 1973 brought him to what was then called the Philadelphia College of Art, now the University of the Arts. And in 1984, together with partners Jan Almquist and Dana Jones, he founded the firm of Allemann, Almquist, and Jones, design consultants. Until his retirement in 2009, Allemann continued to hold an adjunct professorship at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia. Please help me by welcoming Hans Allemann.
Thank you, Roger. I need a few seconds to set up. I also need other glasses. That's what happens when you get old. You need different glasses for different things. And thank you also for inviting us, because it's really a pleasure to be here. And I was here 20-some years ago, the last time I gave a lecture here. And yesterday morning I woke up and I had a scare, because I woke up and I was running a fever. And I said, no, absolutely not. I'm not going to miss this opportunity. And I got the best medication I could possibly get, and it worked, and I'm here. So here we go. There are, of course, places where Inge and I overlapped, and so in some instances you see different examples from different periods, what she was doing or what I was doing. Where it all began. A village located in a valley about 40 miles from Basel. I was born a year before the end of World War II into a family of teachers, and I grew up in a farm village in the Swiss countryside. Europe was recovering from the war years, and life was a lot simpler at the time. On top of a rock at the entrance of our valley towers a castle from the 12th century, a relic from a period when the territory we call Switzerland was ruled by the German kingdom. This fortress is now a museum. My home village also has a long history. In 1968, it had its millennial celebration. Here, I lived an idyllic childhood surrounded by horses, cows, pigs, chicken. Breathing the smells of stables and hay, flowers and blossoming trees. The fields and forests were our playgrounds, and later on hikes through the alpine mountain region, I discovered the forces and wonders of nature. Those are all things that stayed with me my whole life. During those early years, I remember taking notice of these two posters displayed on a wall across the street from our apartment. Without knowing it, it was actually my first recognition of graphic design. I was completely mesmerized by the depiction of the black cat holding a spool of silk thread and that burning coal. Typical for the time, both posters were stone lithographs. The cat was designed in 1946 by Donald Brun, who later became my teacher in Basel. And the burning coal was Fritz Bühler, who was actually Armin Hofmann's employee. Huh? Oh, the employer, I'm sorry. The Basel years. In 1960, at age 16, I entered the foundation year in this building. Unlike many of my classmates, I came with little or no background in either art or design. But I did have a raw talent in drawing. The foundation year in Basel consisted of a well-structured, intense, and highly disciplined program. The required courses taught me to see and hone my eye-hand coordination skills. All of it was new, captivating, and stimulating for me, and I worked on all assignments with interest and with great passion. At the end of the year, this was my school ID, and the most important thing was, of course, the pipe that you don't quite see because of my black shirt. I guess it made me feel older because I was only 17 at the time. I signed up to take the exams for entry into the graphic design program, and together with 12 other students, I was accepted. What followed over the next 4 years would have a profound impact on me and radically changed my life. That's also where Inge and I actually met for the first time in that program. This was also the time when the school relocated into this newly built complex across the Rhine near the German border. Here I had some outstanding artists, designers, and typographers as my teachers. I can account for everything they taught me, but it was really Armin Hofmann who had the strongest influence on my development as a designer. The focus of his teaching was founded on fundamental, thorough, and vigorous investigations in lettering, form, composition, and communication. Luckily, we saw some of that work from Inge's presentation because, unfortunately, my portfolio of schoolwork was destroyed by improper storage. I'm left only with a few samples from my student years. As Inge mentioned, drawing courses, of course, we had throughout our 5 years of study. We would carefully observe and analyze objects or study light and shade, sketch at outdoor events, paint in a landscape, study form and proportion of a figure in a studio, and more. In typography, we learned to set type and structure content, and in a specific assignment, I also experimented with the proof press, trying to find a way to make the meaning of words expressive, just as Inge showed some wonderful examples as well. Only this one doesn't need translation. Here are the only three surviving work samples from my classes with Armin Hofmann. This was a poster for a cabaret theater with the lettering of the name. I attempt to convey the humoresque plays they staged. Children's traffic garden. This was an entry for a competition. And a key piece that I did was this translation abstraction of an autumn leaf. City life, the poster walls featuring Hofmann, Rhode, Müller-Brockmann, Max Bill, and the work of other renowned designers. Art galleries, museums, the theater, the concert hall, or the movie house provided stimuli and inspiration. It was also during those years that Swiss design and the modernist movement reached their peak. After graduation in 1965, like Inge, I was fortunate to find employment at Hartford Advertising in Zürich. The transition from school to the practice of design was almost seamless. Working at this studio allowed me to test and apply the skills I had acquired through my education. Here's some projects from those early years. The repetition and layering of a slogan for a fashion house conveys an idea of fabric patterns. Sales. This was an ad for sales of fur coats, a fashion house. This was very much influenced actually by what we did in Rhode's class, trying to use type to actually interpret the meaning and where type becomes image. And that was always something that fascinated me. The only Swiss poster I had a chance to design, Derby Star, for a brand name for ski pants. And of course, there was a whole campaign around this with ads and stuff. I'm just showing the poster. A logo for Goertz, a fashion house in Köln, Germany. A logo for Nachbar Schulte, a building construction company also in Germany. So in a way, I mean, this was the great thing about that place was that I felt I could really directly apply what I learned in the practice of design. This was not a theoretical at all. Kansas City. I'm sorry, I need to blow my nose. The cold is on its way out, but I'm not quite there yet. So in the spring of 1967, I received a call from the Kansas City Art Institute. Rob Kelly, the chairman of graphic design, was interested in hiring another Basel graduate for his faculty team. Intrigued by the opportunity, I agreed to join them. Since I was only fluent in German and French, I quickly signed up with the Berlitz School of Language. And before leaving Switzerland in August, I managed to squeeze in 12 English lessons. Looking out the window, as the TWA plane slowly descended towards the Kansas City airport, I thought that we were landing on the moon. Coming from mountain Switzerland, I had never seen this much flat land in my life. Soon I realized that the Oxford English I had learned at Berlitz was different from the language they spoke in Kansas City. Luckily, my friend Inge was there, and when necessary, she became my interpreter. Now, here's a case in point, and that straightens out your question. I'm not sure who it was that actually started the 6-hour studio classes to engage in the students' process. When I got there, teaching consisted of students got an assignment 1 week, and the next week, the same day, at the same time, they would come back, and they would have a crit. And usually after the crit, half a dozen students would leave crying. And I watched this for a couple of weeks, and then I said to Inge, I'm totally useless in this crit because I don't have a language to critique work. I cannot even participate. So can you go to Kelly, Robert Kelly, and tell them that Gordon can have his crit, and I would like to, the team teaching thing was all they did. I mean, every class had two faculty members. I would like to actually work with the students, because for me it was important to be able to get engaged in their process, even though I couldn't speak the language yet. And it worked. And then, of course, that whole issue came up in the faculty meeting. He said, do we really need to have this? And we then decided, no, at sophomore level and junior level, we can actually cut it out. It's much more interesting and much more important at senior level, where different people have different input. At the sophomore level or the junior level, you only confuse them. There should be a point of view, and people should have an understanding of where they're going. Students should get an understanding of where they're going. So that's how it came about. Now here's some impressions of the campus in Kansas City, as it was at that time, 1967. It was a beautiful location in a park area near the museum. And the building in front here is actually, those are the graphic design studios. And as you walked into the studio, that's what it looked like. There was work all over the place. That's actually hard to find these days. The work is all in computers and there's hardly anything up on walls. I see that in Philadelphia too. This happened to be a piece that was done in my class. And here I am teaching or discussing something, and here I'm together with a couple faculty colleagues where we had a joint crit, and here are the students. Jim is yawning. When I came to the Art Institute, the curriculum in graphic design was still in its formative stages. In addition to teaching sophomore and senior level courses, I was also given the opportunity to restructure the junior design curriculum. And my goal was to enable students to apply and test the design principles they had acquired in their first year of study in Inge's basic design class. So accordingly, I structured the assignments. They were very simple communications assignments, but geared towards really the knowledge of a sophomore of basic design knowledge. So here you have an example like that. A poster for International Toy Fair. Kitchen utensils. This guy was really quite talented. He was also very good in drawing. And so he attempted to do something for fashion. Then later we also got into logos and identities. This happened to be something for the architects group. There was a competition we had internally to design a logo for the Kansas City Zoo. This was another solution by another student of mine. Then there was also an experiment in typography. We didn't have a full-fledged typography class, so I had to somehow bring that in as well, or type and image combination. They had a fantastic background in photography through Lloyd Schnell. And this was a poster that we actually designed. I mean, we had the whole class was working, everybody contributed, and this was the poster that was finally chosen for the Kansas City Ballet. This first teaching experience had a profound impact on me, as did the time we lived in. The 60s were years of social and political upheaval, of redefinition, and of change. In a print magazine article, Catherine McCoy referred to the curriculum at the Kansas City Art Institute as another 60s revolution. She personally told me once, when I finally got to know her many years later, she said, I so remember these portfolios coming from Kansas City, because she was working at Unimark in Chicago, yes. And she said it was different. It was so different. I had never seen anything like this. And she needed to know what that was, and of course she went after it, as we know. And became quite an influence. Freelance work, as a faculty group, we were actually organized also as a design group, and we called ourselves the staff design group. And of course the projects we did were mainly for the school. Inge actually did a series of posters for the school too. I believe I got this the first week when I arrived to do a poster for the gallery on Ruben Nakian's work. I also designed the school catalog for the 68-69 year. This was an illustration, an inside illustration for that catalog. This was an illustration for the Kansas City Police Department. They were the first police department in the United States that had computers in the fight against crime, which was quite amazing for the time. And this was a competition we had amongst ourselves. We were asked to come up with proposals for a new city seal, seal for Kansas City, Missouri. And everybody had a theme. Mine was Crossroad of the Nation, Center of America. My idea was to do something that was so simple that even a child could draw it. And this is just a fake thing to see what it would look like if it were waving in the wind, or here if it were applied to a truck, and of course stationary and the whole thing. And the Arts Commission thought that it looked great, but it looked too German. In early summer of 1969, I returned to my homeland, and I felt a need to focus on the practice of design in order to learn and gain more experience for myself. In the late fall of that year, I accepted a position at a small design studio in Zürich, and 6 months later, the Halpern agency, where I had started 5 years earlier, again hired me back. I have fond memories of those years, where I had a chance to work with the renowned Swiss designer Fridolin Müller and an amazing team of very talented individuals. Pop art and the first lecture by Wolfgang Weingart, which revealed his playful experiments with typography, inspired and influenced my work. This was a poster for the German philology department at the University in Zurich. Now that mouth that you see up there, that's going to reappear again, right here. Sometimes I recycle things that I get hung up on and find other uses for them. This was for a sales ad. So it's that mouth and that exclamation point that stayed with me for quite a while. This was a New Year's card I designed for Chris Zielinski and myself when we lived in Zurich. And these were modular backdrops. They were actually squares. In other words, these were 4 squares that were assembled to create this shape. But then if you would assemble in a different way, or I had a number of different units, you could create endless numbers of backgrounds, and they were used for backdrops in window displays, or they were also used in fashion magazines and catalogs. And this is a Weingart influence for sure, a sales ad for the fashion house Modissa. Indian summer with spacing type and the use of rules and stuff, very, very, very much inspired by that whole world. In the spring of 1973, Ken Hebert, chairman of graphic design at PCA, contacted me and offered me a position on his faculty team. That was the year when both Inge and Steph Geisbühler left the department, and so in the spring he called me up. Unfortunately, I couldn't come for the fall because I had to finish up some stuff, and I arrived there in mid-September. My assignment was to teach junior and senior level courses. I also chaired the department from 1977 to 1980. These are just a few selected samples, but this was a very, very early one when I got there in 73. I found out that they really, the students, and these are juniors, they didn't have a good, solid drawing background. So I wanted to bring some drawing into my own class, and so we would do these studies fruit and vegetables, and get into drawing translation. And then, of course, do it a little bit like an application, combining it with letter forms for Italian market. But there were some for the Philadelphia Flower Show or whatever. This is another one, again, where form becomes expressive for, in this case, a book of the Wild Palms by William Faulkner. A series that's in the second semester where we did icons and logos. The first one was for an arboretum, a music house, National Flag and Banner Company, and then event posters. They don't need any explanation because they should communicate clearly what they're about, or they wouldn't function. Now, in these cases, the students actually selected the topic. It was something they were interested in, which was I always felt that that's kind of important too. You know, if they're interested in it, they can do better work. They're more engaged. Then, of course, a series that we did 1 year on social issues. These are postage stamps. And the magazine cover. That's actually, these few samples at the end are from a senior level course. Freelance work. While teaching, I also ran a freelance design consultancy between 73 and 83. I did work for the school. This was a concert by the Paul Winter concert. The school gallery, a catalog for a faculty show, or a poster promoting the faculty show. Lecture series, Wolfgang Weingart giving a lecture. At that time I was chairing the department, and I actually took great pleasure in doing these one-day assignments where I would make a sketch in the morning and produce it in the afternoon. So that's one of those. These were the ISO prints, so I could make my own film. I could do the whole thing. I would make the sketch, do the mechanical, shoot the film, and go and print it. That's another one from that series. This was a poster for AIGA Philadelphia when Ken Heber gave a lecture on New Wave design. He actually hated this poster. He couldn't stand it. He thought the color was awful, but it was about New Wave design. It has all the licks. Huh? Is that better? Good, thanks. And then I had a couple clients, or I'm just showing a couple clients here. The photography gallery, I did their identity, and then a series of posters and catalogs, and a major catalog for A.I. Friedman on art supplies store, a big art supply store in New York. During a sabbatical year in 83, 84, Jan Almquist, Dana Jones, and I formed the design partnership of Allemann, Almquist and Jones. This idea grew out of an urge I had to deepen my involvement in the practice of design, and I could not have found better business partners. I relinquished my tenure position at PCA but I continued to teach as an adjunct member of the faculty until my retirement in 2009. This is our team in 1987. We're standing in the unfinished conference room as we were about to move into our first big studio in center city of Philadelphia. And by then, the three-person firm had turned into a six-person firm. The years between 1984 and 90 were crucial to establishing ourselves in the Philadelphia marketplace and building a solid client base. The competition was fierce, but we succeeded. Eventually, we had an interesting client mix, including cultural, educational institutions, and some large corporations. This is all pre-computer, of course, and these are some of the projects that I did at the time. Catalog for Germantown Friends School, a very wonderful school. I spent a whole day there getting a feel for the place, very nurturing, and I wanted that to come out in their catalog. Posted commemorating Halley's Comet for the Franklin Institute Science Museum. The Ultimate Advantage US Pro Indoor Tennis Tournament, where I learned a lot about tennis. A poster promotion for a printer. It was actually, the design was based around this image that a photographer had created, and he wanted to have it published or reproduced, and a printer was fascinated by it, and then I was asked to make a poster out of it, and that's what we did, and they had to print it. It's a very tricky thing to print that, and it showed off their capabilities very well. And this was a Universal Unique, was a symposium at our school organized by the graphic design department, where 35 educators and designers were invited to create a piece. They were given an I, the word word, and a dot grid. And it produced 35 completely different results. The point was to prove that if you gave somebody the simplest means, a whole range of ideas would come out of it. This was the last catalog that I did conventionally as a mechanical, because after that we then switched into computers. This was in '89. The years between '84 and 90 were, oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong page. In the late '80s, through a merger with the Philadelphia College of the Performing Arts, PCA became the University of the Arts. And from '86 to 2009, as an adjunct member of the faculty, I taught senior level courses only. This is a problem-solving course, and it's just earlier today we were talking about often students not knowing much about history of design or the arts or whatever. So I gave an assignment where they actually had to do research on a person, and then they had to come up with a cover design for a fictitious, magazine. And I mean, there was an arts news, but we just named it that. So this was about Lisitsky. And it also had to include a quote by that person. This was on Paul Rand. This was on Calder. And this was a fascinating one. It was an interpretation of a Paul Rand quote. Symbols are a duality. They take meaning from causes, good and bad, and they give meaning to causes, good and bad. I think it was a fantastic quote. So, and I think this is an interesting solution, a very powerful solution, actually, in response to this quote. Then, usually in the second semester, of course, they had to do an identity of in this case, a restaurant of their choice. Bookbinders seafood restaurant. The Middle East restaurant logo and applications were the first studies in my course that were done with the aid of digital technology. I mean, of course, the student first, designed this, but then transferred it onto the computer, and then he did a whole series of prints. Some of them were in color at the end. These were some of the sketches, and back then the printing capabilities were very rudimentary. They were dot matrix printers, but there's a kind of a nice quality to them. We tried to make the best out of the simple means we had. Inge mentioned already in her presentation that when in 1997 we took over the senior degree projects course. And now that course actually existed since 1980, but our aim was to create an integrated interdisciplinary class program between graphic design, studio, and the liberal arts. Because I always felt that liberal arts was too separate from anything else, and if you would pull them in, my beef was that when students had to write a proposal, it was gibberish. It was filled with unfinished sentences and bad grammar, and they couldn't write. I said, how can we let seniors go out and they can't even write a simple little proposal? So yes, Susan Wiggers, she was actually the director of the writing program at the time. I got in touch with her and said, would you support this? Because I also needed extra money to bring in extra people into one class. The team teaching I wanted to get rid of in Kansas City, I brought back, but that's at senior level in this course, and under different circumstances. And it worked. In fact, Susan Wiggers, at the end, she said, this is actually the way we should teach our students, because they're much more engaged and they're much more into it. And the course actually started with, they come the first day and they had to write a story. And she really did that wonderfully, how she eased them into it. And it produced some amazing, amazing results. So in the spring semester, this was one of these stories that one person wrote. And my throat is drying up. This was his experience of having a job in the real world and having to go to work at 9 o'clock, 9 to 5, right? So he's becoming a member of the rat race. So he's interpreting this. It's actually a wonderful story, very humorous. And here is a timeline. It's kind of a fake timeline, of course. But he's kind of excited as he gets up, and then, of course, from then on, everything goes downhill. Or here is another one, is this what I've become? A uniformed man. And in the subway. The aim was really that they should take this text and interpret it in as many different ways as possible. And then, of course, in the second semester, while they were doing this, they did research on their topic for the degree project, and these are some of the samples of the degree projects. Ecstatic Spring is based on the text by Portuguese writer Fernando Pessoa. Now, this student was actually, she was interested in finding out if she could work with totally abstract expressionistic images to give a feel of the text, and she quite succeeded. She was actually the only graphic design student ever to get the President's Prize at the end of the year for her work. They were quite powerful. Of course, you only see a few spreads, and it would be even better if one could read the text. The second one is on Taoism, which is quite different and equally powerful in its own way. Very much of the culture. Of course, it was done by an Asian student. So they had to do the image research and text editing and put a publication together. Now, of course, a lot of the work is done digitally, but in those earlier years, you know, the book was the format. Concentrate, a book about obsessive compulsive disorder, where the woman actually describes what it feels like for her to live in this state. And the student here wants to express that with her images and her text. There were then also, there is a second narrative, the one that is highlighted with yellow, actually talks about therapy and treatment. So there's a double narrative thing going on. As a firm, we transitioned to computers in '89, as I mentioned before. Our business seemed to be moving along smoothly when suddenly, in December of 1991, disaster struck. At age 40, our partner, Dana Jones, suffered from brain aneurysm. Miraculously, she survived and she made an amazing recovery. Still, after years of intense therapy in 1996, she had to give up her position as a principal in our firm. Dana then continued on her own, learning to draw with her left hand. She was right-handed, and her right hand was not functioning anymore. And she became an exceptional fine artist. So until my retirement in 2009, Jan and I continued running the firm. The following is a selection of work from the 90s into the first decade of the 20th century. This was a symbol I designed for the Franklin Institute Science Museum. And the challenge was, the committee said, you know, you should come up with something that a five-year-old could identify with, but also it would be should be sophisticated enough that a scientist would accept it as well. Now, this is, again, a beast of another different nature. It's a little bit like the New Wave poster. I was asked to design a poster for our industrial design department. They had a fantastic lecture series on the new design in America, mainly related to industrial design. However, at the same time, there was also a new kind of graphic design going on in graphic design because of the computers. And so there were these designers that were stretching type and doing all kinds of crazy things because they could. And so that started to come up, and so I wanted this poster to be this kind of a piece. Of course, I got the same criticism as I did on the New Wave thing. Is that how dare you stretch type? The copy is also deconstructed, and that was another thing of the period. But the entire text is actually plain on the site. So if somebody doesn't want to spend too much time with it, they could just read it. This was a poster for Ken Hebert, a lecture he gave, an AIGA lecture. Brochure for the and then some annual reports, of course. Future planner for the Franklin Institute. CDI Corporation, I also did their identity. Another Franklin Institute report. The last one I was involved in 2008, and the very last report I designed in 2009, the year I retired. Now, throughout my career, identity and branding projects were my specialty, and here is a selection of marks and logos I designed over 30 plus years. Innovation Group, a TV producer, a Swiss savings and loan bank, a jeweler, a British art consultant, children's rehab hospital, an investment firm, the Augustinian Order, Jefferson Health System, USP, University of the Sciences in Philadelphia. It's health sciences, so the S actually becomes a snake, you know, kind of echoing the Asclepius staff. Delaware Music Foundation, where the note actually is also D. CDI, as we've seen before, H2L2 Architects, Sapling Synchronized Clock Systems, a developer of augmented reality apps. That's something I did a couple of years ago. And to end my professional work presentation, a series of 7 posters. Here comes that exclamation point again. This was an invitational. I was invited by AIGA to contribute. The chapters had to send a poster. Each chapter had to send a poster, and the chapters had to select one of their members to design it, and I was selected for that. It was actually an honor and at the same time great fun. A poster I did for my friend Keith Goddard, who had a retrospective of his work, both design, two-dimensional design work and his 3D work, exhibitions. Exposed lecture series, photographic design department. Actually, our firm came up with that title, and it's still being used. This happened to be a group of Dutch designers. This was on interaction motion. This was the designer and the audience. And this was a poster for Inge for the presentation of her beautiful film at our university. And this is the last one, which, Roger, you may have seen in Biel, when AGI, Alliance Graphique Internationale, had their congress in Biel, Switzerland, and members were asked to create a poster with the word coexistence, and this was my solution. Again, it's phenomenal when you look at the catalog. You know, there are designers from around the world that had to deal with this subject, and the different ideas that came up. It was very rich. I mean, they expect to get about 60, 70 posters, which is normally what they expect as entries. They got over 140 posters, and they were all displayed in the city of Biel. Now, it doesn't quite end here, but we're going to be ending quickly now. Since my retirement, I've had opportunities to lecture and conduct design and drawing workshops. Occasionally, when necessary, I also did some substitute teaching, of course. But generally, my interest has shifted to more artistic endeavors. I'm focusing again on my old passion for drawing and painting. In a way, I've come full circle, and I'm back to where it all began when I first picked up a pencil and a brush. It's a new beginning. I'm now my own student, curious, still searching, struggling, and learning. A never-ending process. This is my studio in my house on the 3rd floor. And here's a few examples from my studies. The figure was something I was always fascinated by. It's also extremely difficult, and I'm still struggling. But then, in the summer, I'm in the mountains in Switzerland, and I'm actually working outside, drawing and painting. And this concludes the story of my journey. Currently, I'm in the process of preparing my exit from the US, and the last chapter shall be written back in my homeland. Thank you. I need to switch glasses.
For you to ask Hans and Inge any questions that might have come up over the course of these two wonderful presentations today. Hans, you want to join?
I'm coming.
Yeah.
I'm just getting ready.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you think nowadays, in our field, from student to professionals, that they're lacking type as image, like going back to fundamentals? Bruce and I have had this discussion many times. Is that they're ignoring the foundation and the fundamentals of design? And do you see that being produced within digital design work now, that it's out there, not just within print, but with what has been evolving?
Well, her question was about current designers. Are they ignoring the fundamentals, or should they be reevaluating that?
Yeah, I agree. It is, and I think that's largely also the problem with the design programs or the teachers teaching. I mean, if you have somebody who believes in that, then they will make sure that it's going to happen, and especially in the digital media, because when it comes to type, the setting of the type is usually horrible. It's all too tight, you can't read it, or it's too small, and nobody pays attention to it, because it's moving images, it's all exciting, and the detail gets lost.
Do you feel it's being neglected now even more than after?
I saw it deteriorating over the years, because I remember when students were working on the screen in my class, and they did. They would come to me and I said, this doesn't read. Well, it's too complicated because I have to program that. I said, I don't give a damn. If you're going to have to program it 10 times until it works, I want to see different samples. So go back and bring me different samples. And he did. And eventually we got there.
You want to speak to that, Inge?
Yeah, I see it very much in a lack of understanding of letter forms. If you look at logotypes of banks or other institutions, they are often simply taking an existing typeface and cutting off a leg, or and some are utterly not understanding what makes a letter. So the groundwork to understand how letters come out of writing and how they hang together is forgotten. So I would push for an intensive course in lettering and writing for executives in big corporations.
Yeah.
Well, that's my point. That's exactly the point. The students can't. It has to come from the faculty, or it has to come from the program.
I have a question for our two speakers. How does it feel after the intersections of your careers and lives? How does it feel to be together here and to look at each other's presentations?
Well, I think your idea to bring both of us here together is really appreciated. It's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fitting, and I was so happy that this happened, especially with you, because, you know, in all these years, I mean, I never lost touch with this person, and then when she came back to Philly in '94, and we had 15 years, she would come down every week, you know, on Sunday evening she would arrive and would be there until Wednesday. And I have tremendously fond memories of that time. In fact, you know, we grew so close that I basically adopted her as my older sister.
Any other questions? We're running late tonight, but I appreciate those of you that have hung in here to the end, and we just want to wrap up here by thanking Inge and Hans for coming, and we hope that they can make it back, although the weather doesn't look too good tomorrow, but maybe we'll be lucky and they could stay over for another day or two. Yeah, Alexia has a question.
And you have been able to see the growth of design and positive and negatives, like you're saying, stretching the typeface, and, you know, coming from Swiss design. What have you, from your experience within design, what did you enjoy seeing the growth of, and what did you did not enjoy seeing designers doing and approaching? What do you think I guess, what were the pros and cons of the involvement of design within technology and with now the evolvement of design within UX, user experience and UI design, incorporating with designers, because it feels like there's a lack of communication within the design fundamentals that you guys are talking about, and how people are just passing by and kind of, faking it and getting by. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there is a lot of interesting work coming out, especially in the digital realm, and I think, I mean, if I had an opportunity, or if I would be asked today, and if I would imagine to be 23 again, I would be fascinated in actually working now in that medium, and to actually find out what is the proper preparation to work with these tools, because a lot of it is given, through software programs and templates, and so ultimately a lot of things just end up being template based because it's easy to do that. But what's missing is there's nobody out there really experimenting and pushing the boundaries to see what could happen. That's unique and different. It's like Inge is saying, every logo and every symbol these days looks the same, because nobody can draw anymore, and nobody can give it something form. Well, in order to do that, yes, of course, you need the fundamentals.
Say the question again.
Basically, with now the evolving of technology and with the evolving of design, with user experience and UI design and product design, what do you think is lacking within the whole design experience and process? What are we missing in this culture nowadays?
Well, I think it's the solid grounding in the basics. Right.
I mean, it comes right back to educational institutions. They need to ask that. I'm not sure. I'm not so sure. It's that the ball dropped. It's actually that the technology progressed so fast. I mean, I remember, the first time I was working on I remember when a lecture was given in the 80s, late 70s, and the guy said, in another 10 years, you guys are going to have a computer on your desk, and said, that's impossible. I couldn't even see myself working on the computer, and guess what happened, right? So we all got into it. And yeah, I was fascinated, and I mean, a lot of these posters were done on the computer, but of course, in my own process. But then the technology keeps changing and changing, and it opens avenues that are tremendous. And that's actually where now design programs and education programs need to pay attention to what's going on and bring that in so that it can become a force and a strong influence, just as Swiss design became an influence at some point in education.
Okay, I think we're going to wind up here, and thank you all again for coming, and thank our guests, and thank you, Alexei, for all your questions.